hope you're curious about gluten because we're diving in. Dr. Tom O'Brien states in his book, The Autoimmune Fix, that nobody can digest wheat, rye, or barley. Whether or not you have celiac or gluten sensitivity, you can't digest those, so there's really no nutritional value in them for anybody. In one 2015 study published in the journal Nutrients, researchers found that all humans develop intestinal permeability when they're exposed to gluten, regardless of whether or not they have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. Gluten will trigger a temporary leaky gut within 5 hours of eating. Usually the gut will heal by itself, but for people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, within 36 hours, the damage will not clear by itself. So everybody who eats gluten gets intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, but most people are going to heal, but if you're celiac or you're gluten sensitive, your gut is not going to heal itself. So what happens is, this is the tight junction of your intestines. So say you eat some toast for breakfast, you're going to kind of rip that open a little bit, but it's going to heal back. But what if you have a grilled cheese sandwich for lunch? Then it's gonna rip open, but it's gonna go ahead and heal itself. And then for dinner, you have some pasta. You're gonna rip open, but then it's gonna heal itself. So for most people, it's just gonna keep doing that and you're fine. But if you're gluten sensitive, eventually you're gonna get to the point of oral intolerance. What that means is you've just done this so many times and it can't heal itself anymore. So your junctions are gonna be opened and all this food particles and things are going to get right through your intestinal lining into your bloodstream. And that causes a cascade of inflammation, which is going to result in one disease or another depending on where your genes are weak. So now that we're straight on what gluten is and what it does, we can move on to the difference between a traditional gluten-free diet and a grain-free diet. A traditional gluten-free diet removes wheat, barley, rye, and oats from your diet. But those aren't the only grains that contain gluten. All grain contains gluten of some form or another. Dr. Peter Osborne, in his book No Grain, No Pain, states that a recent study identified 400 new forms of gluten, 40 of which were more damaging than the form of gluten for which doctors most commonly test. But with a traditional gluten-free diet, you really only hear about one gluten protein, and that's gliadin, even though there are so many other gluten proteins that could be bothering you. With the grain-free diet, you get rid of all grain from your diet. That includes rice and corn, which, by the way, corn is not a vegetable, it's a grain. And then you also get rid of foods that mimic gluten. So some foods like soy and dairy, as well as pseudo-grains like quinoa, they all have proteins in them that look really similar to your body to gluten proteins. So a lot of people react to those in the same way that they do gluten. A grain-free diet removes all grain, which allows a person with gluten sensitivity to heal and to thrive. Whereas a traditional gluten-free diet just removes wheat, rye, barley, and oats. So if you're gluten sensitive and you're only removing those 4 things, you're still gonna have inflammation and you're not gonna be able to heal.
Oh man!
And I don't think people realize how unhealthy gluten-free packaged food is. All they're doing is swapping out one group of grains for another group. So if you're gluten sensitive, just stay away from it. Stay away from all of the gluten-free prepackaged foods. So should everybody be grain-free? Like I mentioned earlier, nobody can digest wheat, barley, or rye. So unless you're in some kind of a famine situation, there's kind of no reason to eat those over something more nutritious. It's essential to remove all grains if you're gluten sensitive. Symptoms can include things like brain fog, headaches, migraines, things like a runny nose, a sore throat, brain fog, fatigue, joint pain, muscle pain, or a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, so something like eczema, IBS, Crohn's, lupus, any of the autoimmune diseases. If you do have an autoimmune disease, you definitely need to be off all grain. And it is important to note that gluten sensitivity in itself is not a disease, it's just a state of your genes really. And whether or not that gene gets turned on or turned off depends on what you do. You turn on gluten sensitivity genes by eating grain, which is, pretty logical. You can get tested for gluten sensitivity, but those blood tests that are so common are really inaccurate. Again, I'm going to read a piece from Dr. Osborne's book, No Grain, No Pain, about that. There is no lab test for all of the different forms of gluten. When doctors test blood for gluten reactions, the test measures only one type of gluten found in wheat, barley, and rye, creating a potential false sense of security. Even the most progressive lab in the world only looks at a dozen distinct gluten proteins. So blood tests are really not very accurate. The best way to test is actually through a genetic test. I'll go ahead and link in the description below the genetic test that I took. You already know to stay away from oats, barley, rye, and wheat, but to be truly gluten-free, aka grain-free, there's a lot of other things you'll need to stay away from as well. There's a long list, which I'll link in the description below so you have something to reference. But you'll be getting rid of all the pseudo-grains like quinoa, buckwheat, amaranth, along with soy and dairy and other things that mimic gluten. So that list is fairly straightforward, but gluten has a way of kind of sneaking into things. So there are a lot of things that you wouldn't think contain gluten that actually do. If you're looking at your food label, it will be things like natural or artificial flavor, baking powder, citric acid. It's also in most supplements and medications and things like envelopes and stamps. I'll have links in the description below so you have something to reference. Unfortunately, it is super easy to get glutened until you get the hang of it. So you'll need to get used to the idea of calling or emailing companies to ask them where they source certain ingredients from. For example, I was given a bottle of Annie's mustard, and in the ingredient list is distilled white vinegar. Unfortunately, most distilled white vinegar is sourced from corn. So obviously I can't eat that. So I emailed the company. It took them several weeks to get back to me. Their email back to me said that the distilled white vinegar was not sourced from corn, it was sourced from grain. I mean, corn is a grain, so who in the blazes knows what that white distilled vinegar is sourced from, but it's from something I can't eat, so I had to throw that mustard away. And don't even get me started on personal care products. Those are tricky. You have to be extra careful with things like vitamin C and vitamin E if they're in the ingredient list for your personal care products, because they're almost always sourced from wheat and or grain. Unfortunately, you have to spend a lot of time emailing or calling companies to figure out if you can use their products. So if that is something that you would find useful in a video from me, let me know what products you're looking for and I will do my best to give a video for you. I've already done one on grain-free oral care, which I will link to up here somewhere. But let me know in the comments if there's something that you're looking for that you're having trouble finding. Also, if this video has been helpful for you so far, please click the like button. It really helps me out and it'll spread the video to more people. Now let's circle back around to what you can eat. I think the fear of going gluten-free probably stems from looking at those prepackaged foods in the grocery store. They look kind of gross and unappealing, but now we all know that those are full of grain anyway, so you don't have to worry about eating any of that stuff. Here are just a few examples of grain-free eating. Make unpoisoned living easier. So if this video helped, let me know in the comments below. Also leave me a comment if you have any video ideas that you'd like me to cover. Since next Thursday is the first day of fall, I'm celebrating by bringing you some delicious grain-free flavors. So until next time, keep living an unpoisoned life and I will see you with some pumpkin spice. Why did I? Okay, girl. Okay, I've got to stop. I'm gonna get it this time. Watch me. Watch me. Okay. Did I get it? That was it, right? I don't know why I can't speak. Oh my gosh.